Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to talk today about drug identification and toxicology. So, let me get these things to go away. Okay, so let's talk about all these kinds of things. So, first of all, we're going to talk about different kinds of controlled substances, uh, signs and symptoms of overdose. Then we're going to talk about types of toxins that cause death and discuss bioterrorism a little bit and what is the goal of toxicology for a forensic scientist. So, what is toxicology? The degree to which a substance is poisonous or can cause injury. So, if you took me for chemistry before we did labs, we talked about all the different things we were going to use, and a lot of them were poisonous. They had, we called it an LD50, a lethal dose, where 50% of the mice would die at this dose. And so, there were times where we're like, we want to make sure you don't get this in your mouth or your eyes, or, make sure you're not going to inhale this. So, forensic toxicology helps determine the cause and effect relationships between exposure to a drug or substance and the toxic or lethal effects from that exposure. So, this can be done intentionally. So, some people are treating illness or trying to relieve pain and are taking these substances intentionally. Sometimes it's accidental. So, you may not realize harmful combinations or, an accidental overdose. And then, of course, there's deliberately. So, if you are trying to harm or kill others or yourself for suicide. So, this is what we, different columns that you can fall into here. So, as far as poisoning goes, we think that poisonings cause less than 0.5% of all homicides. Of course, on the flip side of that, you could say that those are at least the ones that we know of. If somebody's really good at poisoning people, maybe we wouldn't even pick it up. Accidental drug overdoses are much more common, especially now with fentanyl and heroin. Those substances are really easy to, first of all, get addicted to and then overdose on. So, drug offenders make up more than 50% of the people in federal prisons are there because of drug offenses, and about 20% of the population in just state prisons. So, there's a lot of people going to jail over drugs. Some of the famous accidental drug overdoses, you probably know John Belushi, Chris Farley, River Phoenix was kind of more my age, my time, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, Anna Nicole Smith, Steve Clark. Then there are some famous murders by poison. So, Russia, this is sort of outdated. I could add a few more Russian poisonings on here. Seems like if you are an enemy of Russia, you're likely to be poisoned. And there was, of course, the Jonestown cult. If you ever hear people use the term like, oh, they drank the Kool-Aid, that was a reference to the Jonestown, where they put cyanide in the Kool-Aid and had the cult members drink it. Of course, the option, if you didn't drink the Kool-Aid, was to be shot. So, Georgy Marvok, the Bulgarian dissident, was also poisoned with ricin. So, 5 types of controlled substances. We've got hallucinogens, narcotics, stimulants, anabolic steroids, and depressants. So, we're going to talk just a little bit about each one of these and what they are. So first, let's talk about hallucinogens. What are they? They're usually derived from plants, and they get the intense response varies from person to person. So some people will have different experiences with these. It affects the user's perception, their thinking, their self-awareness, and their emotions. Recently, some of these have been cleared for use in different psychological therapies too. So, what are the effects? Effects of overdoses can include increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, panic attacks, anxiety, psychosis. So, this is, if you have too much of these things. Hallucinogen examples. So, you've probably heard the name ecstasy of a drug. It's again increased heart rate, blood pressure, muscle cramps, panic attacks, seizures, loss of consciousness, stroke, kidney failure, and death are the overdose characteristics. Mescaline, I don't hear too much about that these days, but back in the 60s and 70s, that would have been one that people would have passed around on the street. Again, dizziness, vomiting, increased heart rate, anxiety, irrationality of thoughts. LSD, dilated pupils, loss of appetite, sleeplessness, increase in body temperature, heart rate, blood pressure, sweating, dry mouth, distortion of reality, hallucinations. And then PCP, you've probably heard a little bit about that. Increased heart rate, blood pressure, convulsions, sweating, dizziness, heart failure, and psychosis. So when you hear stories of people, sometimes on PCP, you'll hear like, the cops, they kept shooting him and he just didn't stop, and those sort of things. They just have gone crazy and lost all touch with reality. So, a narcotic is a drug that is meant to sedate or induce sleep. So, this could be things that are pain relievers, muscle relaxers, many illegal drugs. People often refer to as narcotics are actually not. So, the term narcotic means it's sort of a sedative. So cocaine, you might hear people think of like Narcos and cocaine and stuff like that. Methamphetamines, those are the opposite of narcotics. Those are stimulants, but they often just use the term narcotic as a blanket term. So examples of these, again, sedatives, are things like opium, which can cause difficulty breathing, low blood pressure, weakness, dizziness. You can fall into a coma, small pupils there. Then heroin, codeine, morphine, the same sort of thing. You've got low blood pressure, a lot of stomach and nausea, constipation, vomiting, blue fingernails and lips, and death, of course, a symptom of overdose. Methadone. So some people who are trying to get off heroin will take methadone as sort of a step down off of it. But again, you can overdose on methadone and get the same symptoms, muscle twitches, blue fingernails and lips. Oxycodone is Oxycontin, if you've heard that term. Slow, difficult breathing, seizures, dizziness, weakness, cold, clammy skin, small pupils. Again, death for all of those things. And then the opposite of those are stimulants. So, what is a stimulant? Stimulant is something that increases your feelings of energy and alertness. They usually suppress your appetite. But afterwards, when you come off of them, you usually have this depression that results. So it's like it gives you this up and then you fall way down. Overdose effects, high blood pressure, agitation, confusion, seizures, stimulants tend to be very addictive. So even, things like caffeine or these energy drinks, they're stimulants. They make you feel like you can, I can totally do anything right now. So that makes them very addictive. But even, caffeine and these energy drinks can cause harmful side effects if you have too much. So some examples are amphetamines. So if you think of speed, methamphetamine is another version of it, and cocaine. So these are all things that are going to increase your heart rate, make your body temperature go up, and they can cause, look at all of them, have stroke, coma, heart attack, death, bleeding in the brain, rapid breathing, increased heart rate. So all of these are stimulants that can have those effects. And then we have anabolic steroids. What is that, you might say? So it is basically like a testosterone that people take to promote cell and tissue growth. So it's going to increase bone mass and body muscle. Popular with weightlifters and athletes who, want to gain muscle. The negative side effects, well, it makes all your muscles get bigger, including your heart, which can lead to premature death, so heart disease. Mostly testosterone. Examples are, testosterone, dihydros, I can't even pronounce it, dihydrotestosterone, testosterone. And I'll let you read them. I'll quit butchering the names there. And then we have depressants. So what's a depressant? This is the opposite of the stimulants. Depressants are drugs that are going to inhibit the function of the central nervous system. These are used all over the world. The neurons in the central nervous system get affected, and that leads to symptoms like drowsiness, relaxation, decreased inhibition, sleep, coma, even death. So all depressants also have the potential to be addictive. So people, again, this trying to escape things, and use these drugs to help them relax. I mean, there's you can get prescriptions, of course, if you have high anxiety. They might give you some drug like this to help relax you, but they can be addictive, and it can slows down your brain activity. It can relieve anxiety and help you sleep, but you might have slurred speech, loss of coordination. And what happens sometimes, people are taking these depressants and then they drink alcohol, which is going to increase the potency, and then they wind up dying for that. So one of the some of the people we saw on the first screen, those accidental overdoses of famous people, a lot of times will involve they were taking these drugs and drinking alcohol as well. So let's talk about ethyl alcohol. So alcohol, which is ethyl alcohol, is the second most widely used psychoactive drugs in the world. So caffeine is number one. One survey conducted by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services found that nearly 70 million people over the age of 12 reported participating in binge drinking or heavy drinking, and that was in 2002. So this, of course, can lead to lots of problems. And when you guys are off in college and you'll be in places where it's almost like a contest who can get drunk faster. And those are really bad ideas to do, because not only can alcohol, kill you if you have alcohol poisoning, but before it gets that far, it suppresses, we talked about earlier in the semester, part of your brain that makes memories go into long term. So you can go into blackouts, and even though you may be functioning, people may not even know you are that drunk, but you're not making those memories. You won't remember what you did. You don't make good decisions. You do things that might come back to haunt you later when you're not drunk anymore. So alcohol abuse also has high social cost. Approximately 50% of all assaults, homicides, and highway deaths involve alcohol. So think about that. 50% of all murders, somebody was drinking. Maybe they wouldn't have killed that person if they hadn't been doing that. So it can be one of those things that lead you to make bad decisions, like we said. All right, then we've got depressants. Example number 2, barbiturates. So sometimes these are referred to as downers. Again, it's depressing the central nervous system. They used to be used as or viewed as really safe, but they, again, addiction, deadly overdoses have become a problem. So benzodiazepines have sort of replaced them, and to treat anxiety and sleep disorders. Yeah, let's read that. But again, potential for dependency makes them less preferred. You don't really want to be dependent on this stuff. All right, bacterial toxins. What are those? Bacterial toxins are byproducts produced by pathogenic microbes that have taken up residence in the body. Yum. So, you got bacterium can enter the host through contamination of food or water, introduction to the mucous membrane, or direct contact. Some of them are airborne. So you've probably heard of people talk about tetanus. You get your tetanus shot, so that you don't develop what people used to call lockjaw. So where you have these muscle spasms that sort of cramp up. And then there's botulism. So it paralyzes the muscles. Like people get Botox, that's related to that. But again, it can cause irreversible damage to the nerve endings and be extremely deadly if you were going to ingest it. Then there's pesticides and heavy metals. So, pesticides, some of them, which we're using to kill, pests, insects, mice, animals, weeds, fungus, things like that. It can also have heavy metals in it, which those, if again going back to chemistry, those are things like your mercury and have those high density metals, but can also affect your body and your brain. So you talk about DDT, pesticides with DDT in them can interfere with nerve impulses, your heart rate, lead to diarrhea, coma, death. Lead, of course, lead poisoning has been in the news quite a bit, especially with old lead pipes. We talked, up north, they were taking water and treating it and running it through these old lead pipes in like a whole city, just, with kids with lead poisoning. So it can cause, not only nausea, abdominal pain, but in low doses over time, issues with their brain and how they grow. Mercury, acute poisoning from inhalation causes flu like symptoms, muscle aches, also personality changes, headache, memory, balance problems. They used to refer to like the Mad Hatter. Hatters used to use mercury a lot in their work, and they would have those personality changes it talks about there, go a little bit crazy. We used to have mercury thermometers in school, but we're no longer allowed to have mercury around you guys for those reasons. And then arsenic, cyanide, and these things are, again, just more heavy metals. You might recognize them just straight off the periodic table, right? So these are within 30 minutes of ingestion, produces abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and muscle cramps. You could kill somebody, right? Cyanide, same thing. Some people will talk about an almond-like odor when somebody's been poisoned with cyanide, but it's funny, not everybody has the ability to detect that odor. So, depending on the person who finds the death, they may or may not notice that. And again, let's see, ricin is a poisonous protein, comes from a castor bean. So back around 9/11, there was a lot of talk about ricin and terror cells trying to make this poison because it is lethal in extremely small amounts. So it's something that, a little bit could kill a lot of people. Enters the body in various ways. You can inhale a powder, ingest it in food, or inject it into someone, and it could be within a few hours somebody dying. Anthrax, you might have heard of that too. Anthrax was another one after 9/11 that there were envelopes with anthrax mailed around. But it spreads. Initially, you might have thought like animals can spread it. So you may have heard farmers or people talk about anthrax too. Enters the human body through inhaling, ingesting, or absorption, and it can be pretty fatal. All right, so forensics toxicology, we are trying to identify poisons, drugs, or chemicals in victims. It's important in studying drug overdoses and sporting violations. That's where a lot of it comes up now is drug overdoses. Poisons can be produced by living organisms. Pesticides, heavy metals are common poisons. Bioterrorism, again, it's another thing. So, hallucinogens, narcotics, stimulants, steroids, and depressants are all the 5 main controlled substance groups. And we could talk more about drug schedules, and like there's Schedule 1 drugs, which are the things like cocaine and marijuana is in there that supposedly have no use whatsoever beyond, getting someone high. So they're called Schedule 1 drugs, and then there's Schedule 2 drugs, which are still very addictive but have some medical use. So, like Adderall, for example, if you have ADHD, there's a medical use for Adderall, but it's also a very addictive drug. So it's in that schedule too. And then, they go down from there. So I'll have the schedules up in front of me, but we could talk more about that as well. But we'll stop there for today. See ya.